Welcome to the Chaos and Light podcast. I am your host, Angela Laveque, and on today's episode, we speak with Nathan Hanokaee, and we talk about spirituality and Kabbalah, and he is this very interesting young man that I connected with on a podcasting collaboration site. He does something really interesting, being a Gen Zer, with his podcast, is he takes these interviews and he breaks them up into bite-sized chunks, like a minute or two, that he then broadcasts on TikTok and other social media events. So when I asked him, because I was curious about that approach, he said, my generation doesn't have a very long attention span, and I find that this is the most direct way to reach, my peers. And I thought, okay. And so we have an interesting conversation. I really kind of wanted to talk to him because he kind of reminds me of myself as I was just starting to dive into spirituality and learning about some of these universal concepts. I challenge him a little bit on some things and definitely agree with him on others. So I think it's an interesting conversation. It'll give you some perspective. We always talk about more and more people are coming in this incarnation with ideas about spirituality and awakening and the crystal children and the rainbow children and all of that. Well, you get to hear from one of them at the beginning of his journey. So I hope you enjoy that. We will be right back with that interview with Nathan Hanokaee when we return. All right, we're here today with Nathan Hanokaee, host of the Hanokaee. Oh, okay. Host of the Lifted Top Talks podcast. I'm excited to have you on today, Nathan. Let's start a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your podcast and what was the aim in starting it?
For sure. So I started 2 months ago when I just initially got into the deeper meaning behind spirituality and really learning it full on. I started getting into spirituality last year, and it kind of took me aback whenever I first heard about some of the topics, some of the theories that it talks about, the principles, right? The universal principles of karma and this and that. And so when I first, started learning about it, I thought this was like absolute truth that everyone needs to figure out immediately. And I did do my research on different types of spirituality, and I found just the universal principles that of karma, of cause and effect, the ones that we all experience no matter where we are in the world. It doesn't, to everyone and every walk of life, every area of the earth, no one's exempt from these laws, and they exist regardless of if you believe in them or not. And that's what fascinates me the most. And I started the podcast. I didn't have too many viewers at the beginning, but thank God with TikTok, my generation is on TikTok, so we go there. I have a few hundred listeners on there, so it's growing slowly, and I'm very happy to be able to reach people in this way.
Well, I was excited to talk to you because as we discussed off the podcast, I'm considerably older than you, but I think moving through I consider my conscious awakening happened when I was about 14. And within a few years is when I started meditating, and it was really like opening up a whole world for me that I didn't understand before. And at the time that I was your age, the way that I understood spirituality was still within the context of religion. So, I grew up in a Christian household. And then after kind of I started really digging into it, it was studying Buddhism and Taoism and different Eastern philosophies, then Zen Buddhist philosophy. So what was kind of the catalyst for you to explore spirituality, and what sort of things are you reading, looking at that's helping you expand your view?
So I do come from the Jewish perspective and a Jewish background. My family is Jewish, and we have a teacher that our entire family has, one that we go to every week, and we talk and we learn. He mentors us. And so mainly I get my spiritual knowledge from him and Judaism. So Judaism, right, the Bible, whatever. But there are some things within all religions that are common, which are those universal principles, which is what I'm mainly focused on, something that applies to everyone and not just for a specific group of people. But it mainly does come from my teacher, and also the books in which he's getting his information from, and his teacher and his teacher. He comes from a lineage of like something called Kabbalah. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with the word. Yeah, Kabbalah.
Hmm.
So he is a Kabbalah teacher, and his teacher was a very holy man, and his teacher going back generations. It was kind of a one-on-one teaching system, and he is here today, and he's spreading it widely among lots of people in the world. And it's right now, Kabbalah itself has become a global knowledge at this point. There's a bunch of centers everywhere. People are learning Kabbalah. Basically, Kabbalah is just the Jewish spirituality. It's the mystical aspect of
Yes.
Judaism, which, I mean, that is what grabs me. And that's what gets me so interested in spirituality, so I can connect to it in a very personal way.
So, what is it about? Pardon me. What is it about Kabbalah that really lights you up? I'm moderately familiar with it. So, what is it when you're reading? You're like, this really um, makes me excited.
So Kabbalah itself, the one thing that makes me the most excited about Kabbalah is knowing that this is like a technology or a system beneath what we read. So I don't know what your background of religion and what you believe about the Bible and this and that, but basically, whenever we pray, whenever we do certain religious activities that is written in our scriptures, Kabbalah is basically the technology of how that works. Why does praying work? Sometimes, not other times. How does it work? How does keeping Shabbos work? Whenever you get baptized, if you're Christian, right? How does that technology work, and why does it work? And what are the different types of techniques that we can use to elevate ourselves? And what does it mean to elevate yourself? And what are the different ways you can elevate yourself? What does it even mean to be spiritual? What are the different levels of being of a spiritual person, right? Or even dreams. That dwells into dreams. What are the different levels of dreams that you could have? What are the different levels of meditations you could have? Is yoga truly effective? Right? Does Buddhism really have some truth to it? Does Christianity have some truth to it? Does Judaism have some truth to it? Do they all have some truth to it in some way? Right? Perceptions shape reality. Is it truly your belief that causes what you see in your world? So it's a combination of all of those.
I quite like that you're saying that. Well, there's sirens in the background. There's some beautiful juxtaposition about that. Um,
Yeah.
so you use the word technology quite a bit, and I think that's actually something that I've heard people refer to more and more as this idea of spiritual technology. So when you're using that term, how does that fit with this idea? We're discussing, you're over in the US, I'm in Japan. We're using all these, technologies in what I think is more the literal sense of the word. So when you use spiritual technology, can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So, like, for example, meditation. Meditation, I think of that as a pathway that you can actually elevate your soul. So, I believe in God. And so, basically, there's a level at which you can be connected to God. And it's always going to be on a personal level, on a very, very personal relationship that you could have with whatever you want to call it, God, the creator, higher power. I like using higher power and God because it's something that is beneath the five senses. Basically, it's above the physical realm. And the physical realm and the spiritual realm, those are the two realms that I'm familiar with that exist. And so the spiritual realm, something called spiritual energy. And so within these activities in religion or in spirituality or whatever techniques that people, some gurus tell you that you can do this and this will happen, this and this will happen, there's spiritual energy that's being created, transformed, and passed on from person to person, object to object, or person to, idea or whatever, that whenever you're doing that activity, it creates an amount of that spiritual energy. So basically, it goes like this. Whenever you do certain activities, you create positive energy. Other activities, negative energy. And you could also find a balance, which is neutrality, which is, they say, is the best and the hardest to reach, because that's complete peace in your mind, in your life, balance, right? Completely in line with yourself, in line with reality. And it's mainly what it is unreactiveness, because reactivity can be come off as good thing or bad thing, right? You react to someone falling on the floor, you react by helping them up, or you react by someone punching you in the face, you punch them back. That's also a negative type of reaction. What neutrality is about is you see the good, you see the bad, right? The negative thoughts come in your mind to be impulsive, to be reactive, to be negative, and you actually take that moment and that opportunity to step back from your situation, step back from whatever is happening in front of you. Let's say it's a test, right? Someone punches you, how will you react? That's a test. So step back for a moment, acknowledge the test. That's the first step. And then, second of all, look at what your options are. You could punch him back, you can yell at him, you can run away, or you can stay totally peaceful and totally calm and control your anger, control your emotions, control your reactivity, and make the next best decision. And that is what being in a state of neutrality is all about.
Okay, so I think that that is, I mean, that's a pretty good case for meditation and mindfulness practices, is being able to
Right.
step back, be the observer, be the witness.
Right.
Um, Interesting, though. I would challenge you a bit on, I think, yes, there are, in our material world, there's this idea of positive and negative. I think that there's things that you can do that serve you, and maybe in that term you would use positive. Then there's ways that we would interact with our environment and with people that would be more negative. When I think about spiritual energy, I tend not to use the term positive and negative. I think that there are things that are, um, I think, less dense. I like to think of it in terms of density. I think that there are, for example, emotions that are less dense, and then there are emotions that are more dense, that are heavier. And I don't necessarily like to look at them and delineate them as just being positive or negative, because some things are necessary. Some things are part of our process to be able to look at our own darkness and bring it into the light. And so that to me isn't a distinction between positive and negative. It's just a distinction of growth, of evolution. And so I would maybe not use those terms, but I appreciate on a 3D, like a material plane kind of experience, that there are things that are, giving your example about being in a fight, right? We do have choice. And I think there's choices that are more in alignment with who we choose to be and how we want to show up in the world. And then there are things that are incongruent or out of alignment with who we choose to be and how we show up in the world. You,
Exactly, and that's what it's all about. And what you were saying about spiritual energy, like absolutely. I mean, there's different ways of interpreting the way that spirituality functions. I feel positive and negative and neutral is a more simpler way of understanding the laws and the rules. But yeah, there's definitely different ways to perceive it.
So in my mind, and I think you did a pretty good job, divine neutrality to me is, yes, being able to be that witness, being able to not get hooked into the stories. And, you witness somebody in the fight and you can witness that, or you can get hooked into it. Oh, I can't believe that guy did that. What a jerk, blah, 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 blah. People are always treating me like this. And all of a sudden now you're hooked into that drama. You're hooked into that story. Now, divine neutrality is being able to unhook yourself from those things. And the more that we can do that, the more personal power that we have available to, create and live the life that we're truly excited about. So I do enjoy that. So I was wondering, so I'm listening to you talk, and do you have like a strong friend group that you talk about this stuff with, or is this stuff that you are mostly exploring on your own?
For the most part, it's something that I'm exploring alone with my parents. My parents are right there every time that I need them. Great conversations on Friday nights. I wish I would be able to turn those into podcasts. Honestly, phenomenal. Teaching lessons for myself and for everyone. But no, as far as friends go, I have two friends that are really interested in listening to what I have to say about what I learned. But no, not that many people. And that's one of the reasons why I created the podcast in the first place, because I still want people to know. I still want people to play my part in giving people the opportunity to know. So
I think that is so fantastic, because when
be
I was
through
growing up,
social media, through the internet, and I've created all those platforms.
I think that that is fantastic. When I was growing up and I didn't have anybody to talk about this stuff with, and even actually the thinking behind my very first internet radio show was that I didn't have people to talk to about the stuff I wanted to talk about. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to start a show and invite people and we'll have a conversation. So I think it's fantastic that this is something that you're doing, even when you don't have necessarily the peer support or the peer interest, and that you're seeking out these conversations. And I think it's also fantastic that you have parents that are so supportive and assist you in this journey you're going through.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very vitally important to have that supporting factor in your life in order for you to be able to grow, right, with the flow, with the rest of humanity. There has to be someone there. I don't think we were, it's healthy to do this alone. I think it's healthy to, because I mean, you have no boundaries. Then you have no one who's saying like, oh, I see the direction you're going in. That's why I think of religion as that boundary. I think of religion as that supporting factor, the rules, to do's, to not to do's, right? You have the sins, and in Hebrew you call them mitzvahs, which are the positive sins, or positive to do's, not sins, but you know what I mean. So I think of that as the boundary, and then spirituality is more like fun, right? Exploring the mystical side of the world and the spiritual realm. And I think you need a good balance of both. That's what my teacher always tells me. You need a good balance of spirituality and religion, because in truth they are not the same. They're not one. So if you have a balance between both, you can grow in a very healthy rate of speed and learn the things that are healthy for you to learn. Some things not everyone is supposed to know, right? Because of how powerful the techniques and the knowledge is, and how much it can influence your life and the people around you. So I think that that boundary factor is very important, right?
So you make a clear distinction, and I would agree with you, between religion and spirituality. So how do you define spirituality?
So religion, I think, or so spirituality is more, uh let's see, I was gonna say maybe it's more the actual work, like, meaning whenever you meditate, you are practicing spirituality. There is no religious text that tells you to meditate, right? So that's less of a religious thing, it's more of a spiritual connection. But I think that within religion as well, of course, there are spiritual, right, activities and techniques. For example, I think of the sins and the mitzvahs, which are the positives, as spiritual work themselves. Meaning, you don't really have to call it a sin, because I don't like calling it a sin myself, because it already has that negative connotation to it. It's just positive doings and the negative doings, right? The things that are positive doings, again, I'm going to bring back the positive energy. I know you don't like the energy aspect,
It's
but
fine.
right. I think of it as very black and white. You're either doing something that creates positive energy, or you're creating something that is negative. And through the sins and through the mitzvahs, there are two opposing ways to create those energies. And if you create X amount of positive, you end up in whatever. I mean, that the ending doesn't matter. The ending of the story, right? They talk about heaven and hell and this and that. That's not really my focus. If it's true, it'll happen. If it's not, I was wrong. It's okay. I'm not too focused on that aspect of it. More so being a good person, doing good deeds, helping people, being a sharing person, being selfless. I think mainly it's just about being selfless. Selfish and selfless are the main two. Like, in general, like, being positive is more like a giving thing, because I always look at the atom, the structure of an atom, to be able to analyze it better. You have a proton, you have an electron, and you have the neutron. The proton is positive, it gives energy to the electron, which is negative, which receives. And then you have the neutron, which, by the way, science does not know a lot about. And that's really interesting. In my chemistry class, I was learning about the neutron. They don't know anything about the neutron, like very little about what the neutron is, why it's there. And I look at the same thing in our lives. We have with the energies, the neutral energy is like the hardest one to reach. And it's a product. It's more of a product or an outcome that you achieve when you have that balance. It's less of an actual energy and more of a result of being in balance between left and right, between positive and negative.
Hmm, I like that. That's an interesting thought. I heard somewhere that sin just means off the mark, which
Okay.
I like that definition, because again, it goes back to that. Are you in alignment or are you out of alignment? Is there congruence between your values, your worldview, your actions, or are you living out of congruent with your values and worldviews and actions? And I think that that speaks a lot to what you're talking about, is having that energy, that positive energy. You can tell when you're around people who are in alignment with those things, and you can tell when you're around people who aren't. And it's not a blame, shame, guilt sort of thing. It's just, that's part of the process, is creating that alignment between that which what we truly are, the essence of who we are, and our kind of exchange with the outside world. And to me, the more that people bring that energy, that positivity, that even that inner work, and show up with authenticity. And you said spirituality is the light and playful. It can also be dark and heavy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because doing that inner excavation can be difficult work. I mean, uh, as you grow up, and there's you have families, and you have experiences, and there, and even in childhood you can be wounded and experience trauma, and there's a process, and there's an experience that goes along with that process that isn't always light and playful. But there is a lot of really light and playful stuff, and when you do meet people who are living in alignment with their essence, I mean, that's contagious. You can feel that. Like, I can feel that coming off of you, that you're very positive, and you're
Thank
really
you. Yeah.
passionate. And I think that that's a wonderful, wonderful um, piece to have. And I hope that continues.
For sure. Yeah. We all have those vibrations, right? Good vibes, bad vibes. I have a shirt, my favorite shirt. So it says, all it says is good vibes. And it's my favorite shirt. I used to think of it more as a concept, and it's not really, nothing, no such thing as vibes and vibrations and stuff. But now that I'm, learning more about spirituality, that's exactly what it is. It's actual spiritual energy and vibrations that you're giving off when you look at someone, whenever you talk to someone, whenever you think of someone. And that's exactly how the frameworks of other spiritual things work. It's all through those energies, whether it's, I don't know if you believe in psychic powers and being able to talk to people who have deceased and things. It's all through energy, or even reincarnation, the concept of a soul, all these things. It all has to do with energy, and that's how it keeps in contact with things that are not right in front of you. Speech is not the only way to contact, right? Thoughts, you have those thoughts, you have those abilities to think of someone, and then the next moment they call you. That's happened to me 12 times this week. I can tell you right now. It's happened to me like so often, where I just think of something and it happens, or it comes up the next second. And I think it really is the power of the mind, and proves that the consciousness actually has some higher ability, more than just being able to control your bodily functions, and your brain tells your arm to move and this and that. I think there's an external effect that comes out whenever you think certain thoughts.
All right. Well, I had sent you this article that I wrote on synchronicity called The True Nature of Synchronicity, that talks about these events falling together in time that appear to have no causal connection. And so when you're talking about this idea of thinking about somebody and the phone rings, or maybe you learn something, I mentioned somebody's name, and then the next day you hear it again on the radio or something. You probably don't listen to the radio, but you know what I'm saying? Like, and so Carl Jung thought that this was a really fascinating thing. So him and this guy, Wolfgang Pauli, and he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. They started this correspondence that took place over decades, and they were going back and forth about this idea of calling forth things that we need for our own personal evolution. So normally we think of cause and effect, and point A to point B and leads us to C. But in this, we have some connection to sort of the universal consciousness. And on some level, we call forth the events and the circumstances that we need for our own personal evolution. And so I think this is incredibly cool, because in the spiritual circles, we often talk about synchronicity as this really kind of light and playful, like, oh, the universe is leaving me breadcrumbs. But when you start digging into this idea, we are actually kind of co-creating with the universe. It's kind of the very nature of manifestation itself, because on some level, we know that we need these things to grow. And we are able to, whether consciously or unconsciously, and I think humans, our potential is to call them forth more consciously, more often. And that's one of the potentialities that we're kind of moving towards, that we can call them to us to aid in our evolution. And I think this is an incredibly cool idea. And it speaks to what you're talking about, where we have these thoughts, and then we're able to manifest that person phoning, or seeing that thing again, and it's showing up in our space. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. And Yeah, I mean, synchronicity is one of the most fascinating topics or principles or truths of spirituality. I mean, synchronicity, we've seen it happen countless times. And I think of like our world as a spiral. So, what that means is this is a little bit biased based on my religious belief, but you might find some connections with what you believe, which is so during the end of times, what is required to occur is all the transformations, uh, again bringing up the negative energy to
That's
positive.
okay.
So any ounce of negativity that's been produced in the existence of this universe needs to be transformed to positive, before this end of world messiah, whatever you believe, we go to heaven, I don't know, whatever it is that you believe. um and that's either by your voluntary choice or through inevitable suffering that has to occur. And so basically, my idea of suffering is not so bad. Suffering is actually a cleansing process. So every ounce of suffering someone endures actually cleans the negative and transforms it to positive. Yeah, transforms it to positive. So you can do that voluntarily through repentance, which is one method, or through restriction, which we all know what restriction is. Whenever you're in a test and you have the tendency to react negatively, you don't. That is restriction. That is restricting negativity from being created. And not only that, it's a transformation of negative to positive. So there's different ways to do it without actually suffering, right? Another method is, I believe, is whenever you sleep, something in the dreams, your soul, leaves your body and enters this realm. And that's why sometimes you have nightmares that are very vivid and they seem very real. And by the way, there's some people who have had dreams, and this is a study that's done, that they've actually felt the sensation of pain inside the dream, and they felt that they were actually, in pain. Just the same way you can feel pleasure, you can also feel that pain aspect in the dreams. So that's another way that you can manifest those transformations of negative to positive. But so going back to that spiral thing and tying it to spiritual synchronicity is like this: the times, like we're like towards the bottom of this spiral. So what's required to happen is all those transformations really quickly. They need to happen. So, because I don't know what 200 more years, whatever the scriptures say. And so, from now until then, it all has to be cleaned. And synchronicity is something that's going to take place even more and more as the years go by, because we're going to see that very quickly these karmic debts are going to be paid off. So that means all the negative things that your individual soul has done throughout all of its incarnations, it's coming down to these final 2 centuries, which a lot of people who have done a lot of bad things are going to see, the damages that or the consequences for their actions. And that goes back to the idea of karma, and what goes around comes around. And that's not just limited to this lifetime. So that's why, that's why, like, whenever people are really good, sometimes they're good people and bad things happen to them. Doesn't always have to do with what you did good in this lifetime. You also had, I don't know, thousands of other incarnations that you have to pay off. Or that's why when someone does something bad and then they win the lottery the next day, and that's not because you did something good this lifetime, it might be because you did something good last lifetime. There's so many factors that play into this.
Well, again, I might push back, and I think it's okay that we don't agree on things. I think that that is actually fantastic, and it's good to be able to debate ideas. I think that view of karma is a little bit simplistic, and I think um, it's not necessarily about karma is more about the seeds that we plant, and it's not necessarily like a zero sum game of, you did this bad and now we got to wipe those out and we got to, so it's, um, I feel it's a lot more forgiving. There seems to be, in your kind of understanding of it, it's very kind of punishment system. You
I
did
didn't
bad
talk about
things.
the mercy. You're right. There is the mercy aspect that I didn't mention yet. But yeah, there is a way to correct it without actually having to go through with that negative comeback, which is the repentance, which is the acknowledgement of the wrongdoing and the correction of that wrongdoing. So, but yeah.
So how do you correct things from previous lifetimes? How do you know if you don't remember wrongdoings?
personally don't know the answer to that question, but I am sure that there is no, like seriously, there's probably some method of doing that. But you would have to have like someone who's really high spiritually, who is able to see into your past lifetimes, which again, I don't know if that's something you believe in, but it's something I believe in. And if that's, the case, then there should be ways to correct. They're not easy, they're definitely not easy, like, and also it depends on the severity of what you did. You're right though. I'm not sure, right, with the past lifetimes, how you would be able to pay that off. There probably is a method. I'm
Well, I
not.
know in Buddhism they have an idea called merit transfer,
Hmm.
where you can basically give merit to your ancestors or um, even to yourself to kind of wipe the slate clean. So you're giving them merit in order to erase some of their transgressions. I
Oh.
personally am not, again, that idea of sort of punishment, that's not really my thoughts on things, but there is, I mean, this isn't something that is just exists in one belief system. There's lots of ideas about how we deal with past indiscretions, whether in this lifetime or previous lifetimes. um, I want to move on to something that I think is interesting, because we have, two different generations here. uh, I grew up I'm on like the cusp of being millennial. I would be a very, very old millennial or a very, very young Gen Xer. And so I grew up in a totally different time that seemed a lot less insane. We'll just put like, like my childhood. Yeah, I think we went through a recession, and but for millennials and Gen Xers who have grown up and had to go through, the financial crash, the meltdown in 2008, and then really the last 4 years, which have been incredibly politically, socioeconomically, very just chaotic. When you look at what we're dealing with and this uncertainty, what are some of the ways that you navigate this?
Ooh. Okay. So yeah, I mean, definitely there. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to the health crises and the social crises and the election, politics, government, society. All different things happened last year. And I'm not going to say that, I wasn't affected at all by it, but I didn't really suffer the way a lot of people did last year. So I'm not going to say that I thought that 2020 was a disastrous year. If I was to be honest, 2020 was probably my favorite year because of how much I grew personally, in terms of my knowledge and spirituality, psychology, politics, life, physics, science, religion, and you know different areas that I've grown last year. And I think this is the way I think of it. If you were able to keep a positive frame of mind last year, like, I think a lot of this is an indication of, where you are spiritually. If you were able to, and I'm not trying to say I'm a very spiritual person, I'm not, I just started, but I'm trying to say, like, if you thought last year was bad, however, which is the opposite, I think that it's going to only increase, right? Like, going into the next year, 2021, we've already started 26 years, and I mean 26 days already, and people have already been saying that 2021 is off to a bad start. And I mean, I would agree, in a lot of ways it is. But again, sorry, what was your original question?
Well, just if, growing up in a different time
Hmm.
that has been more rife with a lot of ups and downs and chaos all over, with natural disasters and
Hmm.
economic meltdowns, and the last 4 years, which were incredibly tumultuous. What are your ideas on how people deal with the uncertainty?
Mm. I guess I'm kind of trying to understand what you specifically mean by uncertainty. Like, is it like how do I deal with the negative events? Kind of.
Sure, we can start there.
Okay. So personally, I'd never let anything affect me, and that's the hardest, and such a bold thing to say. But no, a lot of times, I am presented with these situations that most people would react to, like, even including being attacked in front of 50,000 people online on social media, right? From this person who I'm not going to mention, but there is some stuff going on. I don't really like to get involved in any negative or any conflicts or drama or things that are going on. So with the things that happened last year, I didn't allow it to influence my personal state of mind, I definitely have perceived it and read up on it. Like, trust me, I did a lot of research on, what happened last year, and found a lot of my own personal opinions on the events that occurred that are not necessarily relevant to this podcast. But the most important takeaway from last year is we saw the negative events, and we have to remain in the right mind. It's so easy. I feel like it's so easy to get taken away and to go in this path because it was just very negative, very negative. So like, I think increasingly next year and the next year, it's going to get even harder to stay in the right frame of mind, because I think we've seen already evidence of that last year and again this year, that it's going in this direction where people are going insane. People are actually going insane. And everyone is experiencing the consequences of each other's actions and then duplicating it and then multiplying it and creating more and more disaster in their personal lives and in the lives of people around them. So I think it goes back to, what are you doing? I think this is the most important thing, where what can we do about the negative events that are happening? Nothing, for the most part, besides save yourself. I think that is the most important thing. You can control how you are affected, not necessarily how she is affected 24 light years away on the other side of the earth, who, is experiencing whatever consequences of the events that are happening last year. But you can save yourself. You can save your own sanity, your own mental state, your own spiritual level, and stay on the right path. And I think if we all took that initiative and did that for ourselves, we would all see the benefits of these spiritual transformations and mental states of positivity. I think right now we're all seeing the consequences of our negativity. We should reverse that. Create those positive, be happy. By positive, you know what I mean. Happy, selfless, giving. It's mainly just selfless. That's the word, selfless.
So your comment about being selfless and looking after yourself seem to be in opposition. I do understand what you're saying, that, the way that we react to situations is our own personal framing, and it's up to us to decide how much we're going to get sucked into the chaos and the negativity, and especially in social media. We probably use different social media platforms. I am actually not on social media anymore, but I've never been on TikTok, or what's the chat one, the Snapchat. I know they exist, but I've never used them. And so I think that there's a piece of that in what you're saying. I understand that there's truth in that it's up to us to decide what we're going to engage in, how we're going to get engaged, how we're going to frame this situation. I do understand that. But I also know that it can't be every man for himself. Like, there is a sense of community. There is a sense of looking after your neighbor, your friend, your community, that sort of thing. So that I feel that when you talk about being selfless and every man for himself has to take care of himself, those two things seem to be not compatible with one another.
That's beautiful. I love that you got me there. Okay, so I want to a little bit explain what I meant. So whenever we say being selfless and looking after yourself, I don't actually look at them as contradictions. I think of them as the same thing. And the reason why is because by being selfless, you elevate yourself. And so by being giving, you're actually becoming higher spiritual. You're benefiting yourself by being giving. You're not benefiting just the person who's receiving. You're also benefiting yourself. And that goes to the idea of selfless behavior is like ridding the ego. It's like kind of diminishing your animalistic tendency to take and receive for yourself and your selfish desire to react. I think of the soul and the ego are at war from the very beginning, that you become mature enough to understand, and until you die. Because babies, they of course have ego and soul, but they don't really have too much free choice at that level. So let's go to the moment where they become mature, right? For girls, maybe 12. For men, maybe 13, right? I think women are a little bit more mature than men. So we have that little bit of a disparity in age. But from the moment you're able to understand the rules of the game and how the game functions, and the fact that you are in this game, which when I call it say game, I mean life. Um, that is whenever you actually give them the opportunity to be selfless and be selfish and aid the ego or aid the soul, or diminish the ego or diminish the soul. But every selfish act you do, you are not actually benefiting yourself. So that's the illusion aspect of it. When you're selfish, yeah, you're getting momentary pleasure, sure, instant gratification. And then the long run causes you a lot of damage. That's how I see it. It's like whenever you're selfish, you're actually hurting your soul and helping the ego. When you're selfless, you're helping the soul and diminishing the ego. Not only are you helping the person who's receiving when you're being selfless, because you're giving, they're receiving, but you're actually helping your soul. And that's what my definition of being selfless and still looking after yourself. That's why I think of them as the same thing.
So, is there anything that obviously outside that you're part of a community or part of a country or part of a planet? Is there anything that is bigger than you that one that you're excited about and two that you're concerned about? Like, are you concerned about climate change or, uh, you know, any of the things that we're facing here on a like, or the pandemic is bigger than the individual. Is there anything that you are excited about or concerned about?
Um, for the most part, I'm more focused on an individual basis. Like I'm more for, like for example, like with social justice and social change and social movements. Those are phenomenal. Like they are doing lots of great things for the world. However, I would prioritize individual change. Seriously, I would prioritize individual reform, individual justice, and individual movements, right, to change yourself before you even attempt to look at anyone else, because it starts with you. And if your house is disorganized, how can you try to teach someone to organize their own life, right? So I think that this is not the first time, right? We've heard this concept, right? Fix your life before you try to help others. I love that idea. I love that idea. I'm all for it. Individual reform, I think, prioritizes social reform. And whenever you've nailed down that individual reform, then I think it's a great time to look at others. And not only that, but also as you're progressing towards, bettering yourself and self-betterment, self-improvement, along the way, right? Grab a few people and say, "Hey, come with me. Let me help you a little bit along my path." But that doesn't mean you have to go on a global scale and say, "Hey, let's all, um, you know, change immediately." No, it starts with yourself. Then you can help others. Before you've changed, you can't actually help. I don't think that you can help others in the same way that if you were already changed yourself. You understand?
Well, yes, I don't disagree with you. I think that, yes, the whole, what is Jordan Peterson thing about cleaning up your room. You're right. You can't, you can't clean up somebody else's house until your own house is clean. I do absolutely agree with that. And there's a certain level of personal accountability that I think is essential to doing changes. I agree, starting with the individual. I also think, though, that we can't turn a blind eye. We still need to have an awareness of what's happening that's larger than ourselves. So I think that we can hold those two things within ourselves. We can do our own inner excavation. We can get our own house in order, and we can have an awareness. Like for me, for example, the environment, everything that's going on there is huge. And again, you're right. It starts with the individual. The individual needs to need less stuff. We just, as a whole freaking globe, need to decide that we need less stuff and that we need to manufacture less stuff and we need to extract less stuff. And so that, of course, starts with individual choice. So I understand what you're saying. And yet we need bottom up approaches, but we also need top down approaches, which requires a collective consensus, a collective understanding. So that means that we do have to reach out to other people and connect and collaborate and build consensus. So yes, I understand what you're saying. And ultimately, that's where I do my work, is helping individuals figure out who they are, how they want to show up in the world and live in alignment. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things that we can do to shift things in the collective. But I also think we need to hold some of that at the same time and understand, you know, things that are happening from more of a like the 20,000-foot view. So like you're
Yeah.
not are you concerned about, you know, our environment and
Oh no,
things?
absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the prioritizing factors of social change, right? Social, something we have to do as a global society. Climate change, right? Whatever other environmental factors that need to be improved, or social movements, right? Social, the way we treat each other, definitely needs to be improved on a global scale. No, I don't disagree with you at all. I think that definitely that societal factor and societal improvement as a collective understanding of each other's suffering and each other's problems and helping each other together. But you sit directly in my desired line of work. Like, I want to be that person who's helping people on that individual basis, to understand themselves, because right, anxiety is very hot today. Also, like, among kids, and also among like people who are just average, like 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds. Everyone is increasingly becoming more anxious, scared, um, and also just reactive. I think that's mainly the one thing. So started with the individual basis. Again, I would still say they're both important. They're both important. Yeah.
So one final thing, do you think social media is helpful or hindering to where we need to go as a planet?
I don't think that hindering is a strong enough word. I think that social media is detrimental to the progression of the individual. I think that whenever you're trying to better yourself, social media will always drag you down. And the reason why is because it makes you feel good and feeds your ego, which hinders you, right? Hinders you from elevating your spiritual self. Now, that is, not to say that the spiritual organizations that are on social media are not beneficial, right? But whenever we're talking about social media for like teenagers, whenever they go on Snapchat and they send those instant hearts, right? It makes you feel good. Ooh, you get those chills down your spine whenever you got those hearts, because you feel so good. You feel actually popular. You feel like you have a place in this world, a place in this friend group, place in the school, a place in society. When in reality, whenever you go outside into the real world, whenever you don't have that instant gratification, you have to suffer from uncomfortableness. You have to suffer from awkwardness. Whereas when you're on Tinder and you're trying to find a date, you don't have to worry about suffering that uncomfortability. That uncomfortableness is not there, because also on Twitter, anonymous users can say whatever they want, no consequence, and push whatever agenda that they want, and no one is able to do a thing about it. And Tinder, Instagram, Facebook, right? If we're talking about again, not those organizations and those institutions that are actually existing to help people, I think for the most part it's stopping your progression, not slowing or hindering or any of that. I think it's just stopping it. So long as you're on that app, you have no ability to think with beyond those bounds of that little box on your cell phone, because it's one of the main factors that is causing us all to increase the ego. I think that's the main function of social media. Increase the ego, make you feel good about yourself.
Or terrible. You can feel terrible if there's somebody decides to pile on you and you have, 2,000 people ripping you
Oh
to
yeah.
shreds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whenever you have 50,000 people on a social media platform who support the person who is attacking you, it's yeah, it could hurt too. So there's different sides, but whatever it is, the outcome is negative, right?
Yes. Well, I'm happy to hear you say that. I came of age. I was about probably your age or a year younger when the internet was first coming out. So I think it's such a strange watching the progression of not only like the internet, but then, the advent of smartphone technology and then social media and just watching kind of the slow degradation of people's ability to communicate with one another, which I think is probably the biggest uh, I think the worst outcome, I think, to come out of social media and the smart is we've lost the ability to disagree and to have nuanced conversations and talk about things in a complex way, because really you're doing little short, you can't have a good conversation in 280 characters or less. Like that doesn't.
Absolutely. And then you go see, someone with 1,000 followers on Instagram. Well, okay, so you have 1,000 friends. But how valuable are those relationships? I wonder how valuable are those 1,000 friendships. Most likely they're not valuable at all. Like, most likely you don't even know the person and they are just following you, you're following them. You still feel good that you have that person who's supporting you or following you. But in reality, they don't give a flying flip about you. They don't even know who you are in the first place for them to even be able to give them the opportunity to care about you. It's just, 1,000 followers on Instagram makes you feel so good, and then you go into the real world and you see, oh, that is a fake reality. Oh, that is not actually the physical realm. That is the digital realm, which is totally different than human interaction, physical talking, speech, listening, and being able to experience uncomfortableness and all the different things that come with physical interactions and human interactions.
Well, we're up on time here. I want to say I'm excited to see where you take all this. I really enjoy your sense of curiosity, which I think is really important. There's a lack of curiosity
Thank you.
that I see, and so I'm excited to see how where you take your podcast and the stuff you continue to learn.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.